Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our DEI book club. We are excited to complete Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Hopefully, you've read it, but even if you haven't, the conversation really does expand into other areas of our life that is inspired by the book. So I hope that you will tune in, stay with us, and participate in the conversation. And without further ado, let's introduce our book club leader, Cheryl Franklin.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Cheryl Franklin, and I'll be leading the book club today. We have some other slides that we typically do when we start a book. I'm going to skip through them and get straight to the bluest eye. So, you guys are all familiar with Kengen Media and with Kennedy and her work in making sure that we are allies. I mean, when I first got reconnected with Kennedy, um, I really didn't understand what an ally was. So now, that I'm understanding what allyship means, it is really become a big part of my vocabulary, and I'm definitely an advocate for it. So make sure you follow up and look at her information. Okay, so The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. We've already gone over the first two sections of The Bluest Eye, which is let me pull out my book because I need a book. Winter and fall and winter. And now we're into spring and summer. So, one thing I wanted to point out, like before we begin, is when the book starts, Toni Morrison does this little introduction from like the Dick and Jane books. It's like, here's the house. It is green and white. It has a red door. It is very pretty. And we talked about this in our last session. But now that we're into spring, where the meat of the story occurs, this is what those passages look like. Is look, here comes a friend. The friend will play with Jane. They will play a good game. Play, Jane, play. But you can barely tell what that says, and it goes from correct punctuation to no punctuation. It goes from, capital letters and lowercase letters to all capital letters. And then even in this, during spring and summer, the words are even split up. So when you look at this passage, the second line of the passage, it splits the word will. You just has like the WI on one line and the LL on the other. And she does it, a few more times throughout those last chapters where it kind of is this jumbled running, mess of life. And I just think that it's really interesting that, aside from the story that she's telling, that she inserts this Dick and Jane piece. So I want to talk about it and compare that really, quickly before we get into summer and spring. Do you guys have anything that you want to add or that you have noticed about how she incorporates the Dick and Jane stories and the way it comes across in these chapters?
Well, I think that that is the reoccurring foundation of the book is when I think of the Dick and Jane books, that is, of course, is part of my childhood, and it was so white. I didn't recognize that as a child, but now looking back, it is painting that picture of what the all American family and children look like, and the lack of minority representation, the lack of, of blackness. So I think it just is that foundation of the idea that whiteness is to be heralded and loved, and that's what we see throughout the book.
Okay, that's an interesting perspective. Kennedy, What are your takes on it?
I'm sure that this isn't literary, but I'm sure there's a literary reason why she chose to do this. But for me, um, I think that life becomes as you live life, it starts to become really messy and not as distinct as a perfectly written sentence. And to me, when we get to these later chapters or later seasons, the story is breaking down. The characters are breaking down. What they're going through, is becoming really dark. And so, even though this was a perfect story, it is no longer perfect anymore. If we are kind of creating a parallel between how this world is portrayed and what's happening with the characters. So,
That's awesome. I love what both of you have to say about that. I think I've said before that I've done this book with several other book clubs, so I'm actually borrowing someone else someone else's perspective. The last time I did this book in a book club, and it was actually a Caucasian woman, and she said, which is something that I don't think I could have gotten initially as a Black woman. She said that when she looked at the Dick and Jane story, the Dick and Jane story was perfect, and it was what life was. And she said, and as the story continued and everything became, you know, you know, there's still no Black people interjected into the Dick and Jane story. She said, but it just shows you that even though it has not been, there's no inclusivity in Dick and Jane, life is still a mess. And so I thought that was really interesting, take on her part, and because I'm like, oh, you know, that's true. Life life can still be a mess. But as a Black woman, what I looked at it from a Black perspective. I looked at it as if, their life in comparison to our life. And that was my initial thought of it. So that's why I love diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when we talk to each other, we can gain a different perspective. And, our eyes can be open and we can, kind of understand where other people are coming from and what their perspective of this story is. So I just wanted to start off with that. And then I'm going to go to spring. So usually I'll put a quote, I put a couple quotes for each section, but I had a hard time finding a quote for spring because it was just a lot happened in the spring. It's the biggest chapter, the biggest section of the book, and a lot happened. So instead of me putting a quote, I wanted to just dive into the characters and talk about, what's going on with the characters during spring. So first, I want to talk about Pecola and Pauline. Um, in during the spring section of the book, we learn a lot about Pauline and how she loved the movies, and what her upbringing was like, and that she had a deformity, and uh, when she moved to Ohio, she was pretty much isolated, but you know she her the beauty, what she valued was, she didn't really value she valued the inner beauty initially. She was a church going woman, but then the outer stuff came to her attention, and she lost a lot of her loves, like in movies. And so I thought it was interesting that she did name her daughter Pecola, which is the character out of Imitation of Life. So I just kind of want
Oh.
to talk about, Pauline and Pecola and their relationship and how that unfolds in the spring. Any input?
Hmm. I'm not sure how I didn't catch that, even though I love Imitation of Life. I hadn't thought hadn't thought about the naming of Pecola. And then of course Imitation of Life being another complicated um movie, obviously,
Right.
about the lives of, the different lives, the parallel lives of Black people and white people, and um, the star of Imitation of Life wanting also to be white. And of course, Pecola in the book wants to have blue eyes, which is, whiteness. So that's very interesting that you pulled that out.
Yeah, when Toni Morrison is just an excellent writer, and I think, like I don't think that I really got it until I think I forget which character it is. One of the little girls, where she befriends or acts like she's going to befriend Pecola. She tells her that, oh, your name is Pecola, like the character in Imitation of Life. My mother loves that movie, and Pecola doesn't even know what the movie is. She's like, oh, I don't know,
Mm.
and neither do Frida or what's the girl's name? The main character, the narrator. Why am I having these?
Claudia.
Claudia. So they
Yeah.
don't even really kind of understand um that welcome, Avery. Thank you for
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
so
so we're talking about Pecola, the name Pecola being the also name of the main character in Imitation of Life.
Oh, right. Okay. And they mentioned that. She mentions that in the book too.
She
And I missed
does.
that. I didn't catch that.
Right.
Yeah, I think I remember it, but I didn't make any connections. But one thing what I'm learning about myself, particularly in the last two books, is how judgmental I am of mother characters. And you all remember, Cheryl, how I felt about what's her face. Um, her name?
yes,
Whatever. Her. But I feel similarly for Pauline, and now that I've made this connection, is she really annoyed me when her daughter was with her at work and how differently she treated, the her employer's kids. And and how they called her Polly, and just so endearing, and you're just this great lady, but when your kids have you fighting, cussing, and doing all that in front of them, so you don't have nearly the same regard as you did. And even though Pecola wants to be white, I almost think that she named her Pecola because she would like to have somebody close to white
right.
as a daughter, and sort of, we become what people project on us sometimes. And I believe that, sort of some of the things that Pecola actually wants is projected on her, because if I would say I'd want to look like that, so my mommy shows up like that at home, because this is not the mommy I see. But perhaps if I look like that, then you would be nice and kind and, spoil me. And, if I mess up, it's okay. I just get a hug.
Yeah.
Uh, but that is not how she treats her kids. And so here is another mother character that I really do not like.
I think Toni Morrison does a really good job at, trying to help us understand the root of these characters that we don't really like that much. And with Pauline being handicapped or whatever, and having to raise her, brothers and sisters, being one of, I think what they said, she was like one of 10 children, and she like raised the youngest two, and and just not feeling beautiful, and come to Ohio where things are very different than in the South. And it like points out that maybe she didn't realize that she was ugly until she got to Ohio, where it was pointed out to her that, oh, you look like this, oh, you look like that, oh, she had these other flaws, but her appearance became an issue once she got to Ohio and she had these children, to the point where she doesn't even want to go to the movies anymore. She doesn't even like the movies anymore. And so the fact that, she names her daughter Pecola, and we know how the imitation of life plays out. She didn't like her mother. She was angry. She had issues with her mom. So like you said, you kind of put this on your kid. And I think about people who name their kids after cars and then different things. It's like, I want this, and so I might not ever be able to get it in life, so I'm gonna name my kid that.
Mm.
So now I got a Lexus. I gotta, that type of mentality. But this has been going on for forever, and so I think it's kind of interesting that it's a small piece of the story. It's a small, like, it comes across subtly, but it's such a big piece of the story and who Pauline is, which leads to why Pecola wants these blue eyes. Right?
What do you
And
think,
don't
May?
we all
Go ahead, May. Sorry.
Yeah, and don't we all project ourselves onto our kids?
Absolutely.
That's such a good point about it starts with the name. Like, that's literally the first opportunity that you have to project your desires onto your child by choosing a name based on what you like, based on whatever your pop culture is, based on what you see as popular, not thinking about I want this child to have a strong name, I want my child to have an independent name, because most of our children are juniors, or they're or even take the mother's middle name. So certainly, so in this particular instance, yes, she could. I mean, that could be that she was projecting onto her, and then we don't know what kind of relationship she had with her own mother. Perhaps she had a contentious relationship with her own mother, and she expected to have a contentious relationship with her daughter. That it may be, from her own self-esteem issues, she didn't have strong feelings about her own daughter.
Yes. Avery?
Yeah, let me apologize for my lateness. I had to put my twins, Rolls Royce and Corvette.
You speaking that into existence.
No, I'm kidding. I don't have twins. All right.
Yes.
I mean, no, I mean, look, what am I adding? I agree with you. Right? I mean, Toni Morrison's book is, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's, I mean, I, it's rooted in such realism, but I think even though it's rooted in realism, it's also there's a lot of symbolism that she has inserted in there to kind of underscore her theme, and and the naming of her Pecola obviously underscores the imitation of life theme, because she even mentions that, that we want to imitate somebody whom we are not, and the mother, it's sort of course, laid that on her own daughter. So it's, to me, it's just another device, or a writerly device that she uses to really just highlight the theme that she is really trying to that's pervasive throughout this whole story.
Yes.
So anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Let's move on to the next character, Charlie. Like I said, earlier, Toni Morrison has a way of, trying to help us understand these characters that we just love to hate. But you almost can't hate them because you do kind of feel sorry for them and their upbringing and the things that they've gone through. So
Yeah,
with,
I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. You spot. Go ahead.
no, so with Charlie, what do you think about that?
Well, for me, it underscores the whole uh, uh, generational curse. That is really another theme that she carries on in this not in this book. I mean, you saw where the boy came from in terms of just being not just abandoned by his mother, but actually left to die, and was saved by his older aunt. And then when he goes to seek out his dad. His dad basically tosses him aside for a dice game. And I think that what we're saying here is just the sort of the cycle of abuse. Unfortunately, it's generational. It seems to be, as she's saying, with certain people. So it ends up with him, and then he ends up being the abuser. And I don't know if she's actually seeking for sympathy or understanding, or making just a very salient point that some things are carried along, and at some point, we have to sort of break
Break the
this
cycle.
curse, to break the cycle,
Yes.
break the wheel. Any Game of Thrones fans know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what I'm always just marvelous about, just the masterful painting that she does with characters, with what is called this circular narrative. That she'll present somebody, and then we'll kind of go back in time and kind of revisit them again and hit them again. And then we get a sort of a new understanding. I think that's genius in a way, because we meet people for the first time. It's like me meeting you all for the first time and making a decision about who you are. But then I learned something about where you've come from and how you've got to where. And now I have a totally new understanding and an appreciation in some cases of who you are. And she does a fantastic job at doing that.
Yes, she does. Excellent writer. I think the thing that stands out to me is when he is forced to sexually perform in front of those.
The white man showing with the lights on him,
Right.
finish up, nigga, finish it, whatever, right?
Right. You're telling him he's not you're not doing anything for her.
Right.
And that what that does, and that was his first experience. So where do you go from that? Like, when you don't have someone to help you out of that, someone to coach you through that experience and let you know that where do you go from that? How do you have a healthy sex life? How do you have a healthy attitude towards sex or towards women in general? Towards how do you come out of that if you're not supported in some kind of way?
Yeah, you make an interesting point, especially the last part you said. How do you, his attitude towards women? Because it was interesting that his anger was not necessarily on the white man, but on Darlene.
Yeah.
Right? That he focused it upon her. In other words, you got me into this type of
Right.
thing.
Right.
And because of that, I'm sitting here being humiliated the way I am. And
Yeah.
so, that maybe the seeds of that sort of sexual anger that that stayed with him constantly throughout his whole life. At some points he became very suave, but other parts, when that demon in him just continued to grow and manifest itself in incredibly negative ways, all the way through to his own child.
Right.
So,
being a female, I think that when you have a negative attitude towards women, it's not it doesn't discriminate. It's women, period.
all right. So here I'm gonna pose an interesting question to you all. You all's first sexual experience, was it all stars and and bouquets and and just that magical Disney-ish experience?
Mm.
For me, Go ahead.
And let me tell you why I asked that. I asked that because then how did that inform, or does it necessarily inform how you will proceed, think about sex later on?
Well, I'll tell my story, and it's a little bit non-traditional. Um, Oof, you got me. um, my first, I witnessed. I have friends who were sexually abused by relatives. I had friends who were sexually abused by women, girls who were sexually abused by, other women. And I have friends who had very negative sexual experiences. So when that and me, I'm a control person. So for me, I wanted to be in complete control of my first sexual experience. I did not want to chance it. So when I lost my virginity, it was very calculated. It was with someone who wasn't a boyfriend, but a very, very good friend that in my 17-year-old mind, I thought, oh, this person is going to always be in my life. So it's safe for me to do this. And because I was trying to control that. And so, like you're saying, it did carry on. It does. Those first experiences, I think they do carry on with you through life. And why you made the decision you made, or how you got to where you were, it does have an effect on you, and it does carry on. And I think that's why it's so important to have people in your life who can coach you through those misinformed actions. Because at 17, I thought I was smart. I thought I was doing the smart thing, but I wasn't. But I thought I was in control. But that's a 17-year-old mind. And I had a lot of guilt and shame attached to that until, I talked to older women, my mom, but it was hard talking to because I come from a Pentecostal family. So it was hard to say, oh, I did this, but when you have people in your life that love you and care for you and nurture you, then your mistakes don't feel as detrimental to life, and they don't carry forever and ever because you can heal from them, which is a big part in this story that I want to get to in the end, is the healing part. So I hope that kind of shed a little bit of light on what you were asking.
Yeah, I was just, yeah. I guess what I was trying to do is to figure out, is it always a causality thing? I mean, in other words, a lot of early sexual experiences are not all that fabulous, but then how does it always inform your perception of sex later on in your adulthood, or does it not?
I think it does, but I think you still have to be nurtured. I think you still have to have a village. You have to have people that you can talk through those things with, because I mean, depending on how old you are, welcome, Dr. Tiffany. Depending on how old you are, I mean, your decision could be stupid.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who starts out having sex as a teenager is really prepared for the emotional ramifications of such an adult decision. We, live in a society where sex is okay at a young age, whereas in the earlier days, perhaps in those days, it wasn't as acceptable as it is now. But it absolutely informs your thoughts of, if it's a bad experience, then you're having negative opinions about men. Society has created these images around men, and the idea that that's all they care about, and the idea that women aren't supposed to enjoy it, and it's, somehow it's a prize. We're taught that, giving ourselves is a prize, not that he's also given himself. So certainly those ideas um, uh, help to paint a picture for us of our own um, choices around sex and what we want to do in the future, and who we date in the future, and who we have sex with in the future, and how often we decide to. I think, certainly I would say my first experience, I was 17 in college and couldn't wait. And so looking back, was it all roses and spectacular? No, it wasn't, because he didn't know what he was doing and I didn't know what I was doing. And looking back, it was probably the worst sex I've ever had. But at that time, it was the best thing ever. I couldn't I couldn't wait, and I was excited the next day. I couldn't go to class. I was like on cloud nine, and so yeah, so the picture that's painted is totally different from now versus then.
Wow. Wow. No, I love what you said in the beginning, because it's what I say to my girls, that particularly my 15-year-old now, it's just that you cannot possibly handle it right now, and just trust me that you can't. And I, got a similar message from my mom. So I did wait. And I think that that helped me have a really healthy outlook on it. But when I was, working with girls in foster care, many of them had it taken from them. And so sex was very transactional, and as a means of getting or giving something. And one day, a well-meaning person came in to talk to the girls about things, and she says, you are a prize, and wait. And then one girl just left, ran, went to her room, and cried. And actually, she locked herself in the closet. And I was just like, can you come out and you talk to me? What's going on? And she was like, what do you do when it's been taken from you? And in this particular case, Pecola, can't possibly have a healthy sexual outlook based on, what has happened with her father. And so, to answer your question, Avery, sincerely, it absolutely informs. And when it's taken from you, and you in an abusive way, then you really will spend a lifetime trying to live that down, or trying to have something healthy. But it was sad to me that so 1 out of 2 girls in foster care have been sexually abused. So more than half, actually, that I ended up with, really struggled with how to have a healthy relationship with a man, as they were getting older, and it had everything to do with their past.
Wow. That's something else. Whew, that's that's heavy. This book is heavy, and it's the whole that it's based around the fact that she's impregnated by her father. And she tells you that right up front, and then you find out the story. It makes it, your every bit of it, every reveal is a little, it tugs at you. Forget the on top of the colorism and the poverty and everything else, it's this sexual abuse that is just like on this baby. And that's something, you know that if you haven't been through that, I don't think you can really begin to understand what that feels like. And like I was saying earlier, I have friends who had gone through that, And so I try to take control. Oh, I'm going to be in control of my. But even then, that young mind is just not able to handle it. It's not able to handle what comes along with an act that brings forth life. That's a heavy burden. All right, let's talk
Can I
about.
just,
I'm
if I
sorry.
may,
Go
if I
ahead.
may, I just want to note that as I think about that unfolding, the ways in which it subtly perpetuates the dehumanization of individuals and communities, the ways in which not only does it foster these kind of transactional relationships, but also the disconnection from self, family, and community are troubling to me. And so I think about like where must not only the perpetrator be that they're not able to connect that in to the humanity of that person on which they're perpetuating that act, but also the ways in which it has subtly led to the perpetuation of the objectification of uh, our young girls, the ways in which it reinforces men seeing their prowess in those ways and how destructive that is, and just in the overall disconnection in terms of the ways in which it skews things like intimacy for us, even intimacy with ourselves. And so as I think about even the evolution from being shadow to how do you get to a place where you're empowering folks to lead families in healthy ways, I'm like, I can't negate the ways in which that initial beginning as shadow inform maybe the kinds of disconnections that would allow us to perpetuate those kinds of acts in our homes and against our own, the very ones that we have birthed, and how the manage that, whether it's the numbing that can happen at times or the ways in which it skews just your perception of safety and whether you should have it can be a barrier to forming healthy relationships. I have to wonder, particularly as we think about those who are system impacted, and the foster care system is one. How do these things serve some of the larger issues that are happening in our communities? And I say that from a place of a few places, not only as a survivor who had to reconcile that experience and then later struggled with even something like breastfeeding, as I thought, oh, I know this shouldn't feel like a violation, but in some ways I can separate when I get to choose, or even the ways in which um, in some homes or some communities, we literally have silenced the members of families from talking about it. And so the impact of those family secrets and lies and the narratives that evolve from that result in addiction and so many other things when they go unaddressed. And so I see it in his narrative as an opportunity to critically look at those things. So not just the physical or emotional abuse that ensues, but how does this disconnection serve some of the other societal issues that we are seeing, and how do we get to a place where not only we move beyond the silence that supports the perpetuation of some of these issues, but also get to a place that we see the ways in which it's connected to some of the larger challenges. So like if I, as a result of maybe being in a community or in places where I'm disproportionately impacted uh, by this issue, at the same time where there's a culture around us not being connected, like, hey, I don't catch feelings, I catch flights. Like, who is served by the ways in which we are catching things? And how do we get to a place where we can not only unpack it for ourselves, but the generations that will follow us so that they understand the ways in which it fosters a number of other issues that we struggle with in our community. So if I'm disconnected from myself because something has happened, and now I'm disconnecting or not building relationships as a protective factor, maybe I'm making some different kind of choices about my worth or who, or even allowing others to not only objectify me, but like commodize or monetize just even my image or some of those things. I think about even some of the young artists that we see. And I'm like, I know this young lady is only 14 or 16, but we have her in hot pants, a
Yeah.
tube top, and she is shaking it. And that is a part of the career path for this work that she's doing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good material right there. That's something that I think we could spend a lot of time on just individually aside, from the book. That's something that's worth, having a forum on and discussing, because it's definitely necessary. Thank you so much for sharing with
Can I
that.
add to that a little bit, Cheryl?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to say some of the systems that and we had a little talk about this earlier, you and I, but I do think that there, especially then, and this time this book was written, there's really no outlets for mental health.
Right.
Um, and particularly Black people who have gone through such trauma and are living under such fear really every day, from, lynching to, being mistaken, or not being mistaken, but being accused of stealing because you're walking in the store. Like, there's just consistent trauma, and especially then. And then in some of the ways that men particularly needed to exert power in some kind of way. And in a lot of ways, he had very little power with Pauline, um, and the way she treated him. But I feel like and then after his thing in the woods, he definitely needed some guidance. And as May was saying, how was he supported? Or you were saying, how could he been supported after a traumatic event like that?
Right.
So it's not surprising. And then when it comes to, the complexity that a daughter and her relationship with her father, and how she's supposed to navigate that, and then how she would navigate it even after that. And I think that it only is, to me, it's showing up now, which is a good thing. But before, there just really weren't any ways to help people get through the daily trauma that they were going through. And so I just wanted to
Right.
just add mental health into that.
Yeah. And we have to remember this book, what it takes place during the Great Depression. So, and in Lorain, Ohio. So no, there was no outlets and no support. But things are definitely changing. And I'm thankful for that. That, people can get, you don't have to have, I think what I feel is that you don't have to have a supportive family anymore. There are so many other people out here that will support you and help you and lead you and guide you if you allow it. So I think that's really important. It used to be this thing that what goes on in the house stays in the house, and you couldn't tell anything, or you, like you were saying, a lot of, Dr. Tiffany, you were saying that a lot, you shut up a lot of people. But now you can get professional help. There are places that you can go, and you can be heard and you can be helped. And that's very important. So let's talk about Soaphead Church really quick before we move on to summer, because I definitely want to get to summer and we don't have a whole lot of time left. So who wants to dive into Soaphead Church? He's a very interesting character.
Yes, Soaphead jumped out to me as probably one of the characters that bothered me. And I say bothered because I couldn't, there was no, I, there was, I could not connect with him almost at any point, So what is he? A West African young man who is in love with whiteness to the point that he eschews anything Black. And when his father tells him to go find himself, he doesn't want to find anything close to his roots or heritage because that would indicate being Black. So then he launches into this whole thing of becoming a minister of sorts or a spiritualist. And then I guess his climaxing moments was this letter that he writes, sort of explaining himself. I get that this character again still underscores the theme of beauty and not loving yourself and loving an aspect of whiteness, but in a lot of ways it was still I didn't find him a very engaging character at all, and if anything, I was just waiting for him to finish that damn long ass letter, So
Right.
Anyway, that's my just quick jump on Soaphead, right?
I was so perturbed with him, like the fact that he made her kill the dog. That just
Right.
really just
Oh my gosh.
ticked me off. I'm like, what a coward. I'm like, you want the dog dead, but you're too chicken to do it. So you're gonna use her insecurities, which she's not, you can't give her blue eyes, but you're gonna use her insecurities and her pain to execute your wrongdoing.
Yes.
That is just so foul.
And he's a pedophile, and and I'm like, me spending time with this pedophile was bothering the hell out of me, right? And so anyway, but
yeah,
it's a very provocational character. I mean, in terms of to provoke, I guess, this outrage we're feeling,
Yes, he's the one that you're allowed to let it out on. I feel like you're like, okay, I've had enough, and so you get the the bulk of my anger.
Right.
Anyone else want to talk about Soaphead before we move on to Summer? No. Okay, we're gonna move on to Summer.
I'm just glad that Avery didn't like somebody because he was throwing a whole bunch of looks when I was talking about Pauline. So, and my judgment of her motherhood, you were like, I saw your eyes. You were looking. You.
What are you talking about? Right?
When I was talking about Pauline and my judgment of her motherhood, you were like looking like, just you can watch it back. You can see though.
Oh gosh!
I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm gonna move on to Summer.
Yeah, thank you, because somebody's sipping over there, right?
Yeah, I just got water.
Okay, right now. Okay.
So, Summer. I put 2 quotes here that I felt like stood out. Page 188. So much for memory. Public fact becomes private reality, and the seasons of a Midwestern town become the. Now, I Googled how to pronounce this. This is a Greek word, and I always thought it was moire, but that's not how you pronounce it. Some said it's moire, and some said
noir. I think it's moire, like noir.
Oh, it's like more. Okay, but it's Greek. So anyway, the word of our small lives, and that word is that's the 3 fates in Greek mythology. Those are the 3 fates, and so I wanted to point that out because she throws that word in there instead of just saying, talking about the 3 fates and what the 3 fates mean. So I want to talk about that later. And the next quote that I put in there is, all of us, all who knew her, felt so wholesome after we cleaned ourselves on her. We were beautiful when we stood aside her ugliness. And then it goes on. And then at the end it says, and she let us. So those 2 quotes keep in mind when we talk about these next 3 topics. So the 3 fates and determined human destinies and a person's allotment of misery and suffering. And I just think it's interesting that she wanted to use the big word, the fancy word, instead of talking about, the human suffering. And then I want to talk about Pecola's dialogue with herself. Went on for a lot of pages. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was reading that, I was in character reading those pages.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my goodness. And then I want to talk about the blame. Who's to blame? So let's start with the three fates. Anybody?
Tell me what that word means again.
It means the three fates in Greek mythology. And what the three fates, they were three characters that determined human destiny, like how much suffering a person is allowed to have in life. So it's life, birth, life, and death.
All right, and go back to your quote. Let me read that one more time, if you
The
can. I'm sorry.
quote is,
Yes.
"So much for memory. Public fact becomes private reality, and the seasons of a Midwestern town become the morai of our small lives, the more whatever of
All
our
right.
small
Yeah,
lives."
of our small lives.
Yes.
That becomes private reality. Correct. And the seasons of the
So keep in mind that the
okay.
summer starts out, the section of summer starts out with the girls. They have saved, they have their seeds, and they're ready to sell these seeds so that they can buy their bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
And as they're going from place to place, they are getting bits and pieces of a story. And that story is the story of Pecola's father impregnating her, and she can't go to school. Should they keep her out of school? And people are just really basically talking shit about Pecola. And they're upset. It upsets them because, and some people are saying that the baby is going to die, and they feel like nobody is caring for Pecola or her baby, and everybody just has so much to say. Let me see if I can pull it up.
By the way, while she's doing that, let y'all know that Raphael Warnock won here in Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yay. That's something to celebrate.
Yeah.
It is. Congratulations. My God.
Hey, I did it as that vote, that Morehouse man. There it is, right?
Do you know the percentages? I'm interested.
You said what now?
You have the percentages right now?
It's close still. 50.7 for Warnock, 49.3 for Herschel.
I understand how
They
it's
called
even
it
be
because
close.
I kept
Yeah, they called
watching
it.
it. Oh, they called it. Okay, because I kept watching it and they kept going back and forth
They
with the
called it.
leads,
Mm-hmm.
and they kept saying it was too early to call.
Yeah, they called it. Yeah.
Awesome.
That
Okay.
is great. I watched their debate a month ago, and
Yeah.
I can't see why 49% of y'all
Right.
think this is a good choice.
It makes no
That's
sense.
the scary part.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right, go ahead, Cheryl.
So it says, I want to start. We remembered the knuckled eyes of school children under the gaze of meringue pie, and the eyes of these same children when they looked at Pecola. Or maybe we didn't remember, we just knew. We had defended ourselves since memory against everything and everybody considered all speech a code to be broken by us, and all gestures subject to careful analysis. We had become headstrong, devious, and arrogant. Nobody paid us any attention, so we paid very good attention to ourselves.
Mm.
Our limitations were not known to us, not then. Our only handicap was our size. People gave us orders because they were bigger and stronger. So it was with confidence, strengthened by pity and pride, that we decided to change the course of events and alter human life. And this is when they started talking about what they were going to do to save Pecola's and her baby.
Right.
And that's when they planted the marigold seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of selling them to get the money to buy the bicycle. So back to the three fates. What do you think about that and a person's allotment being left to like the gods, and how much misery and suffering a person can take in reference to Pecola and what the girls were going through when they, were listening to the people of the town, like not have any sympathy for her or this unborn child.
Yeah. You know, there's a phrase that I often use a lot, that God laughs when man plans, in that, that so much of our life cannot be charted or planned, and there's the precariousness of just the world and the universe has its sort of way of unfolding, even as much as we try to dictate what the future could or should be, and I'm sure each of us in our own respective lives can attest to certain moments where he's like, I thought I was going along this path and I ended up over here. So the same way with the girls had a plan. We were going to plant this, we're going to pray and sing, and nevertheless it just still did not happen the way they wanted to, so I think that she's saying that to a certain degree, life, we have to sort of give into just the precariousness of life, and literally the God or gods laugh when man or woman plans,
Absolutely. Any other comments on that?
That first quote particularly resonated for me because I thought about the notion of if you have ever had to live down something publicly and what others are saying about it, and that work that you have to do at home privately to kind of reconcile what others are saying about you and your experience while somehow trying to hold on to your personal truth. And the fact that where we are as a community or what's going on around us in the world will decide just how much misery we get handed in those things was powerful to me. I can think of so many instances where we have these narratives about what we think people did or should have done or what's really happening, even though we're not living it and wasn't there. There's the weight of the person who has to reconcile that. Like, am I?
Mm-hmm.
What they're saying about me or trying to make of me? And then the piece around, like, depending on where we are in our journey or how we think it may impact us, will sometimes strongly inform just how much that person will get to live down, or even if they should be having to live down anything. So like if I'm personally impacted by it, that how dare they? Do you see them doing that? And maybe I'm not. And so I'm like, I really don't care what they're saying about this person. So they get to have a second chance. Or the ability to step back and say, none of us were there. Or none of us have all the details. So maybe we shouldn't be saying or doing anything about this, and definitely would be sad if we knew that that person was having to sort through this somehow public fact when they're the only person living through it. So I thought it was an opportunity to think about the ways in which, even when you tied to that second quote about people cleaning themselves with you, that kind of high horse place that we can go to sometimes when we think we have the ability to take the moral high ground and lose sight of the fact that it's oftentimes all relative. Were some interesting things that came to mind for me as I thought about those two quotes in her journey.
Yeah. I love these two quotes. I feel like it kind of wrapped up what the girls were going through as her friends, the only friends that she really had. But then even they abandoned her, right? And so I did, this is why I wanted to include those two quotes. The next thing I want to talk about is the dialogue that she had with herself. I just thought it was heart-wrenching that even when she was talking to herself, she still wasn't accepted. You're having this dialogue with this imaginary person that you've created in your mind, and this person still doesn't think that you're enough and still doesn't accept you and leaves you.
Yeah, from a craft point of view, I thought it was a very bold move because she basically just put us into madness. And because by this time, Pecola had pretty much lost her mind. And so we are actually in the thick of it, hearing her talk to herself, her alter ego, and it goes on for a minute. And I think that says something about Toni Morrison's willingness to say, audience, trust me. I really want you to get yourself into the mindset of a woman, of a young girl who has basically lost her mind, and stay there so you can understand sort of what she's saying, instead of just being on the outside saying, okay, she done lost her mind and she's just talking to herself. But let's get into the conversation and stay there for a minute, and not just find a conversation that's going to acquiesce to everything she's saying, but those with the warring personalities of what Du Bois talks about, that two-ness, that we have sometimes these warring personalities within us fighting for a given understanding of who we are. And so the places in there I thought was pretty genius and pretty bold.
Especially when she tells herself that she liked it. That was insane to me. I'm like,
yeah, the whole thing is insane. I mean, right.
I'm like, oh,
I mean,
like,
yeah.
and I can imagine, and you hear about, victims feeling like maybe they asked for it, or maybe, maybe they wanted it. So to address that was like, it touched you. It made you, like you said, she didn't just let you look at it from the outside. She brought you directly in it, and that made you sit in it for a nice long time. And I mean, to the point where this is hard to read. This is like 10 pages that are hard to read. Like, you have to put it down and be like, okay.
I mean, look, there's this guy that's at the Texaco or the gas station, and he's clearly, he needs help, right? He mumbling to himself all the time. I see him all the time, right? I swear I could not sit there and probably listen to him for 5 seconds, let alone to hear pages of what he's talking about. But that's one thing that a great artist can do. They can take you places where you are uncomfortable going. And so she takes us into the mind of this young girl at this point. And it's hats off, because that's what a great artist can do.
This is the first time that she actually says the bluest eye. So she always talks about, she wants blue eyes, but then in this dialogue is when she wants the bluest eyes.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that it's really, really nice. Okay, and the blame.
Expand on what you mean by blame.
Who's to blame for Pecola's outcome?
Oh. What's the blame? What's the blame?
I want to talk about that. And I really kind of want to go back to that quote. And if you guys have time on 205 to read it. I mean, it's a lot. It goes on, about, them wiping themselves on her or whatever. All of our waste, which we dumped on her and which she absorbed. All of our beauty, which was hers first and which she gave to us. All of us, all who knew her, felt so wholesome after we cleansed ourselves on her. We were so beautiful when we stood aside her ugliness. Her simplicity decorated us. Her guilt sanctified us. Her pain made us glow with health. Her awkwardness made us think we had a sense of humor. Her inarticulateness made us believe we were eloquent. Her poverty kept us generous. Even her waking dreams we used to silence our own nightmares, and she let us.
I think that it's interesting when you when you say who's to blame. It's so hard when it's a complete cycle of victimhood. We talk about the sexual abuser was likely abused, and then the person who abused him probably had been abused, and it's a continual cycle. You have this cycle of generational curses. You have
Mhm.
this just this constant cycle of everyone being victimized. So it's hard to blame the person who is doing all of these things to everybody. It's hard to say, okay, well, her father was to blame for raping her, and then of course, she being the victim, we don't blame her. And as a child, she has that innocence where she cannot be blamed for anything. As a child, being reared in a situation, an abusive situation, it filled with poverty. And the same goes for the person who victimized her. So I have a hard time with placing blame.
Mhm.
I do think, you know, it is up to an individual to somehow find the wherewithal to break those cycles and chains. But I read a quote the other day from Dr. King that said, how can you ask a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps?
Mm.
Yeah.
So now you're basically asking these people to be better than everything that they've ever known, to be better, to denounce what they have been, what has created in their own lives this level of misery and emotional damage. So I think, so I am like on the fence about whether or not there's someone to blame, where when you simply, you're asking someone in a wheelchair to get up and walk just because they have the will to do so. So yeah, so I'm right on that fence about whether or not you can blame someone for everything that has transpired throughout these lives.
I think when I thought about blame, I thought about who was healthy, who was
Hmm.
mentally healthy enough to help any of them. And so the only characters I thought that were mentally healthy enough that could have helped anybody were Claudia and Frida's parents. And so to me, if I'm going to blame, I don't think that I can blame a person, but I think I can blame situations.
Hmm.
And that's where I ended up at. But I had the reason why I came up with blame is I had come across something that blamed everyone for her situation. Everyone was at fault. Everyone contributed to her losing her mind at such a young age because no one stepped in to offer anything that they could have offered. We all have broken pieces in us, but we do have something that we can offer. And no one stepped in to offer anything. And there's a lot of adults in there in the story.
Well,
And
didn't the two young ladies, did they offer friendship to her?
the prostitutes,
I mean, yeah. I mean, well, I forgot about them. Yeah, the prostitutes did, didn't
yeah.
they? And then they gave her pretty dresses. She said, and all the shoes she wanted, right?
But did
And
they
then
really?
Claudia and Frida didn't they offer? Weren't they actually? Weren't they genuine? Pretty
Yeah,
genuine
they were
friends,
children.
right?
So
But
how can, as a child, and you have to also remember that the narrator is Claudia, so
right.
it's coming from her point of view. So how as a child, how can you help this girl? And and like I said, summer
Well,
begins with them
but
hearing them.
listen, a lot of this book deals with childhood trauma. It's the trauma that that she paints, especially about one half of the book. I mean, in the middle section, about how trauma is imposed upon children to children trauma. The way that they're
Mhm.
treated in school, and so to a certain degree, I think she's saying that children have a certain responsibility that they carry, and so like the little light skinned girl, Madeline, whatever they call her name, Magpie, I forgot her little nickname they gave her, Meringue Pie, that was obviously a child that was wielding her beauty to navigate her way through adolescence, whereas Claudia and Frida were wielding their, I would say, a little somewhat adolescent maturity to navigate their way. And part of their navigation, they befriended Pecola.
Yeah, and they took up for her as much as they could, and
Right.
that's why they said they didn't really have a voice, but what they could do, they did.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
is why they sacrificed their little money and planted those seeds.
Correct.
So
I was going to say, I'm not so certain. I landed on the piece around assigning blame or trying to understand who had agency in it. But there were two things that I took from that discussion. There were opportunities for me to unpack some things. One, the ways in which unaddressed trauma can devolve into insanity. And so that dialogue back and forth, I thought about even some of the ways in which it shows up in our daily lives, like imposter theory, where literally there's this dialogue happening internally about your being enough or sufficient as a part of that process. And then the other piece around this notion of cleansing ourselves, for me, that unpacking was a opportunity to look at the intentions of my charity.
Mm.
And so when I find folks seemingly in these conditions that I would regard in a particular way and feel compelled to help, being clear or certain about even my own intention. And so you know how folks talk about, because I gave, I feel even better. I got the greatest gift because I helped. Just even thinking through the ways in which I could get clear about my own intention in my charity or philanthropy was another thing that came up as I was considering the two areas that you discussed, and wondering if anyone had any thought about that. Like, have you found yourself in some internal dialogue as you're trying to reconcile why others would do something, or just even maybe some of the challenges that you faced in your life, or even in the workplace? Who knows, right? And what is that dialogue? And does it swing from one extreme to the other as you try to reconcile it or come up with a strategy for coping? And then beyond that, as we hear this framing about the cleansing ourselves on others by seemingly helping out, like how does that inform our thoughts about charity and our intention?
I'm
Any
so
thoughts
happy
about
you
that?
yeah, I'm so happy you brought that up because that leads me to this page. And the center of this page is healing. Oh, healing. And yeah, that's self-reflection. I think is why we do these book clubs, so that we can have that self-reflection
Mm.
and find out where we land and what has, how has it prompted us to do better. When I put this slide together, I just wanted healing in a center. I really didn't pay a lot of attention of all of the words that are surrounded by healing, until because I had this on our last slide, on our last presentation too. But when I was doing this one, I looked, and it's love and kindness just really kind of stands out for me. Those are two very free things that you can always afford to give to everyone. And for me, that's where it is. It's the love and kindness. It costs me nothing to do that. And sometimes everybody doesn't know where the resources are. So giving financially is wonderful, but how many children are don't know the resources or can't get to the resources or are afraid to be at the resources, but you can encounter them at the mall or the grocery store or wherever, because you don't know where these kids are and what they're going through. And not just kids, people in general. We do not know what anyone is going through.
Mm.
And it costs nothing to be kind. And for me, this is a reminder when I thought about, the blame and the situations, the poverty, thinking that you're ugly. We don't know what people think or why they think it, but it costs nothing to be kind to them anyway. Because that should be a reflection of what we think and feel about ourselves. And it's hard. Sometimes it's hard to be kind to yourself. I struggle with that. I struggle with that.
I think for me that's interesting that this has come up, because this just happened to me last week. At work, there's a black lady who's relatively new in our office, and she is so bubbly. She's bubbly. She's thoughtful. She's always bringing little candies, to me, or to whoever, and she's just it's kind of overwhelming in that it appears that she has a need to be liked. And she told one of our coworkers, the coworker mentioned to her, "Oh, May could help you with that." And she was like, "Yeah, but May doesn't really like me." And so the coworker came back and told me that. And she was like, "So you can't say anything. You can't say anything." I was like, "I have to." I was like, "I have to address that because I think she's an awesome lady and I think she's sweet and thoughtful and bubbly and kind. And I would never want her to think that I don't like her when that's not true." And I told her, so I went in and talked to her about it. And she was brought to tears because I told her, how great and wonderful she was and that I would never want her to think that. And I just, had to explain that I have tunnel vision when I'm working. I'm really busy at work. I'm really stressed. And so sometimes maybe I could come off that way. And I have resting bitch face really bad. Like I have to tell people that that my resting face is terrible and that it doesn't mean that I'm mad or angry or what have you. But what that did for me was it created in me a negative dialogue because it's what have I done? Are there other people who are walking around thinking I don't like them because of something that I say or something that I do or the way I act? And so now I have made this about me as opposed to making it about whether or not it was about her and whatever she's going through, that she feels the need to be overly like she has to do all of this stuff to make people like her. And it's very important that she is liked. And so it does, like you said, it doesn't cost a thing to be kind, and loving toward people. And, regardless of the motives between she and I, or who's at fault or not at fault, it has changed how she feels in my willingness to not be like, "Oh, well, I don't care because no, I don't like her," or my, not addressing it. But by me addressing it, it has changed the whole dynamic of my relationship with her. I'm more thoughtful in my interactions with her. When I'm busy, I'll just say, "Hey, I'm really busy right now. Can I come chat with you later?" Because she likes to chit chat, and I'm really busy at work. And so I think that, yeah, we can't have these internal dialogues that the roots, we don't even know what the roots of the dialogues are. And we have to be conscientious about not making other people's stuff about us, but at
Right.
the same time using it as an opportunity to grow and using it as an opportunity for introspection, but not going down a rabbit hole of feeling bad about who we are because of a situation that has occurred.
I want to reiterate that 99.9% of what people think, say, and do has nothing to do with you. It has to do with them. So, I mean, I feel like we should keep that in mind when people have opinions about us, that we don't let other people's opinions about us live, take root in us. We have to remember that their perspective, our perspective forms our dialogue. It forms, our interaction with others. And it's strictly our perspective, just like it's strictly theirs. So keep that in mind. I mean, don't wonder too much because that was her perspective coming from her experiences in life and what she's gone through, where she felt that way about you.
All right, sure. We're about 20 minutes over. Do you want to get our final thought?
Final thought. Our next book, How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accents. This is a really good book. It's about four sisters that moved from the Dominican to the United States as children, because their father was basically like running from the government. And it kind of works backwards. When you first meet the sisters, they're adults, and then it goes back into time on how they became who they are. So this is a really good book. It dives into assimilation as well. I know we talked about that last time. And so I think this is a great read for us to continue our efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, thank you so much for joining. I'm sorry that we've ran over so much, but we had a lot of comments, a lot of talking. It was really good, and thank you guys. I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to reading how the Garcia girls lost their accents with you guys and discussing it. And we'll keep you updated on the dates for that book.
Yeah, thank you all. So hopefully, so we'll do this probably in February, you think?
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yes.
probably then. All right, guys. Are there any final thoughts on Bluest Eye?
Last thought, and this is this. I love the way that that Pecola becomes the foil or the measuring rod for them to feel good about themselves. And Toni Morrison really does a good job of painting the picture of saying how certain things make us feel good. It's like the quote from Desiderata: "Be careful about comparing yourself to others. You may become vain or bitter." And I totally get that. Like if when I go out to LA, I look at all they drinking kale and the juice, and everybody's all slim and tight. I'm like, ooh, I don't feel good about myself. But let me go to Mississippi or Alabama, and I feel real fine. Like you put me on the cover of a romance novel compared to that. So I totally get it. And thank you all. Thank you, Kennedy, for introducing me to this group.
Yes, thank you so much.
May, you have any final thoughts?
No, that was great. Definitely very insightful, and it's always a great opportunity to learn something new that I can apply to my own life.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. Tiff?
I just want to say thank you for the journey and the opportunity to have a real dialogue with myself as the narrative unfolded, and the opportunity to share and grow with each of you all as we unpacked it together. Some really good stuff. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you guys.
Thank you. I didn't jump in about I'm sorry. I blame the collective. And I do, because I generally don't see fault in individual people, but I blame sort of how we all come to an agreement on how we're going to govern ourselves. Why there's so many homeless and hungry people. I just feel like if we came together, we could solve that. I don't know why 49% would vote for, a particular candidate. It's all of those things, but it's a collective thing. And why certain people, were even elected president. It's just like collectively, I think that there's a lot of fault there, and a lot of apathy, and a lot of anonymity. People think it doesn't matter. I'm just one person, but we're one person who lives in community. And so community is really, really important, and the collective is important to me. And so I
Yeah.
think that, this book would have been different if there was a different collective who saw Pecola and all of the issues, actually, Charlie, all of them, Pauline, things could have been different.
Yeah.
That is it. All right, guys. Well, until next time, you are officially Kengen Book Club members. I will always be in your email asking you to join, so just be prepared.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
guys.
being here. Well,
All right.